Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I am Chris Mackowski, and joining me today is one of the great, brilliant minds behind those Civil War magazines that you love. Melissa Winn is the director of photography for HistoryNet, and so she's the one who makes all that magic happen for America's Civil War Times, American History Magazine. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Delighted to have you. So every March for Women's History Month in particular, I like to show, hold up role models to show women who work in Civil War related public history. And you're not necessarily a face forward person, but your work is familiar to tens and hundreds of thousands of readers. So I just thought it'd be kind of fun to talk a little bit about what you do behind the scenes there at the magazines.
Yeah, sure. Great. I would love to. And I think it's great to, there are so many females in this field, scholars, military historians, creative people, so I think it's great to showcase, that you can be a female and love the Civil War too and do a lot with it. So.
Well, and it is, the stereotype is that it's a male dominated field and, old white males, not that I have anything against them. I will be one day. But you said there are a lot of women in the field that tends to get forgotten about. What's it like for you as a woman working in the field?
So for me, I've had pretty, I am kind of behind the scenes. So, I've had a pretty good experience, so far, really, I haven't run into a lot of, challenges, I would say. I think people are pretty generally willing to share their knowledge and talk to you. And I think that's pretty good. I think in any field, you've got people who are experts and they kind of, know they're experts. So, but that's everywhere. So I think I mostly deal with people on the phone a lot, and when I do go out into the field, people are really helpful. I especially find the Civil War photography community so generous with their knowledge and their research, and they're embracing of everybody. And I think that's really great. I've not really run into a lot of challenges in that vein, especially in the Civil War photography field. I do think there are times when, there's sort of a perception of, women might not know as much or something like that. I think that's a challenge in any kind of intellectual pursuit, really, when you're a female. It really is. And I found that in writing about other topics as well. My career has spanned several different media entities, and I've covered a lot of different stuff as well as being in the history field. I think there's always sort of a general idea of, there's always a couple people who think your, ideas are cute or, quaint, something like that, and might not take you as seriously. I actually think it's, it's always something that's there. Particularly for myself, I'm very interested in, and I'll give you an example here. I think this is a good example. I'm very interested in John Rawlins as a general in the Union Army. I've studied him, researched him. I think he's an unsung hero of the Union Army. I really do. And I kind of joke that, without Rawlins, there would be no Grant and we wouldn't have won the war,
It's no joke.
It's not a joke. It really isn't, and I think I've done a lot of research on him. I've gone to Library of Congress. I've gone to Galena, and I've done a lot of research, but there are still people where I'll say, John Rawlins, and, I think, oh, you want to marry him or something? I'm like, no, I don't want to marry him, or, oh, you think he's cute? And I'm like, the guy was dying of tuberculosis through half the war. No, I don't think he's cute. It's kind of I mean, it's a little dismissive, and it can be a challenge to say, no, that's not exactly what I'm talking about, but you will run into that. And I think that's just something that if you're in, honestly, any field, really, you get kind of used to that and, just shrug it off. So.
Well, and certainly you have the ability to demonstrate your expertise, of course, month after month by showing off the great work that you do.
Right, absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, I love the work so much. And I think that's one of the fun things about being kind of behind the scenes is the work gets to, stand out there and speak on its own. And I think that's great. I think there's so many great ways to interpret this war. It's a challenge too. I think that's what's really fun about it. We have 9 history titles at HistoryNet, and they deal with military history, Vietnam, World War II, and the Civil War. And, Dana and Chris, they're so embracing, the editors, they're just so creative. And Dana especially has really great ideas, and he's really he really kind of helps me go forward, to be creative and push ideas. And we're always kind of talking about how we're dealing with 4.5 years of war and putting out issue after issue after issue and finding new content and new ways to interpret that and new photographs, new art. That's a challenge. And it's fun, though. It's a fun challenge. So it's fun to meet that challenge.
I suppose, 4.5 years of war, we've got 2 photos of Stonewall Jackson we can work with to tell.
Right. Yes, I know.
Fresh. It's got to be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. That's more than, some people too, I mean, we just had this story that we did about Albert Sidney Johnston, and it's funny. It's like you come to the meeting, it's like, nope, there's only one picture of him, and no, we don't have anything else, or there's this colored illustration based on that photo of him, and that's a challenge that we just have to meet. I'm like, sorry, he was killed early, so
So what's a director of photography do?
So the director of photography position at HistoryNet is, we have a photo department, a photo research department. And it's, honestly, I think the publishing industry in itself, especially print publishing, is a dying industry, unfortunately. It's a challenging industry. It's maybe not dying, it's in constant transition at this point because of the digital nature of everything. So the digital nature of things has changed how we can succeed presenting our content. And we're constantly having to try to meet that challenge. So in a lot of, I think photo editing and photo researching was sort of a specialty, research idea that's kind of going away. People think, oh, I just Googled it and found it, and I mean, I'm not kidding. I've had people say, well, I just Googled it and found it. And it's like, oh my gosh, that doesn't mean you have the rights to use it. Somebody owns that photograph, especially with works of art. If they're in a museum or something, those are copyrighted and or trademarked, or, I mean, somebody has those rights, the rights to publish those images. And that's kind of a gray matter now, a gray area that didn't used to be gray at all. It used to be pretty, for lack of a better word, black and white. This is mine, you can publish it. And the internet has taken all of that away. I mean, you put something up on the internet and it can be, taken away. I mean, copied, pasted, and reshared all over the place. So we do have a photo research department with 3 photo editors for our 9 titles. And so the director of photography position is in charge of that department. And I basically have a set of standards, that we're supposed to meet in terms of crediting artworks, researching them, but also making our research accessible to the editors, the art directors, stuff like that. So a sort of a set of standards for how we proceed with our research. The one of the things I love about HistoryNet is we are really meticulous about trying to be right. And if we're not right, we have an audience of people who are really happy to tell us that, and I'm glad that they do, because, and again, it's not even like it's not like hey, you got that wrong, or it's oh, wait a minute, you might have gotten that wrong. It's a different attitude. It's not like a haha, I've caught you. It's oh no, let's work together. I think that's great about the audience. They're as passionate about this subject as we are. So when we do get stuff wrong, they write us letters or they send us emails, and for the most part, it's oh no, I know that this unit went here. And I mean, there's so many little nuances about the military tactics, the military uniforms, everything, that it's difficult to be on top of everything. And so our photo research department, they are tasked with trying to do that job. We need to, a good example actually is we have a story coming up in a future issue of Civil War Times with the 1st Alabama Cavalry. And that is a little known Union group from Alabama. And, if you don't know any better and you just start Googling 1st Alabama, which a lot of people will do, you're going to get a lot of 1st Alabama stuff. It's not all going to be correct. It's going to be Confederate mostly, and it'll be infantry units or, there's other cavalry units associated with those, so you'll get plenty of stuff, but it won't be correct. And our job is to make sure that what we put in the magazine is correct. And that's not as easy as it seems. So, and regarding, all the wars, because, we have the Vietnam magazine, Military History Quarterly. So, our military scope is huge. And so it can be a lot of research. And we do try to, have the photo researchers working specifically. So both of the Civil War titles are under me, both of the military history titles are under one researcher. We have one photo researcher who's like an aviation expert. So aviation history, yeah, that's his. And I can't say that if I had to take his job, I could do it, because I don't know, what he knows about the differences in, markings on airplanes, and they make a big difference. So
one of the things that I always like when I send in an article to you guys, it's like, what pictures are they going to come up with to help illustrate this? And it's always kind of a neat treat to see what you guys were able to do to help interpret that article through.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, because I wanted to show you a little bit of an idea, and everybody a little bit of an idea about why we can do things so differently. And I think that's a great kind of segue to that. Let's see if I can do this correctly here. Okay.
I think of technology here for us.
I think this is it. So this is, these were just a couple little slides I was going to show you, which I could go back to if we want to, but this is, I think, a really great idea about illustration of kind of what goes into the photo research and art idea behind a story. And this is a story that we did in a recent issue of Civil War Times about the cornfield, the fighting in the cornfield. And it was a new look at the fighting in the cornfield at Antietam. And the story itself is very detailed, and it's a great, you just get such a great understanding about the fighting and where the troops were concentrated, the back and forth that happened there. And what Dana, the editor of Civil War Times, kind of came up with this idea. And this is a story where, you know, if you open up a magazine, it could be illustrated in a number of ways. It could have lots of illustrations about, you know, the paintings that people have done based on the fighting at Antietam. There are some real famous Don Troiani paintings about the cornfield fighting at Antietam. There are Brady, you know, or Gardner photos, you know, there are Antietam photographs of Antietam battlefield, and you could use those. And then there are also images or artifacts, we like to use artifacts as well, from the actual troops in, you know, that were fighting in the cornfield. And Dana kind of came up with this idea, and I thought it was, you know, it turned out so brilliant because the story itself is very detailed in the tactics of the fighting. And what he decided was, you know, what we should do is show the human side in pictures to add to the tactics. The tactics are there, the fighting is there, you get all this sense of what that fighting is, and we should also put the face on it as well. So what he decided, and what I went and then, you know, worked on to research, was just using imagery of people who had been wounded or killed in the cornfield. So this article itself is, you know, particularly, you know, illustrated that way. So we actually started it out with the picture of the Miller farmhouse, kind of pointing out that it's a casualty as well. You know, it's got its own story of loss and casualty, you know, due to the fighting in this cornfield. And then the rest of the article really is just, you know, people who were wounded or killed in the cornfield. And then we do have maps for a lot of the articles to show, you know, give people a visual, especially when we do something like this article where it's very detail oriented with, you know, these troops were located here, then they moved here, then they fell back here. We like to give a map to show. And David Fuller is our cartographer, and he's just incredible. So this article this is how we decide to illustrate it. And again, you could do a lot of different things. You could throw a Troiani painting in here, and you know, they're great. They're wonderful paintings, but we also do use them quite a bit. And this is just a different take on it, and it really is almost haunting to just be able to look through this article. And when you're reading it, it has quite a few quotes to see the faces of these people who were wounded or killed there. And that's it. And this is a great example of trying to make sure you're right. You know, the amount of research it took to kind of break down, you know, and go find, these were the units that were fighting in the cornfield, and then go find photographs of these people. It took a lot of hours, and, you know, it was just a lot of, you know, typing in, going to different historical society archives, and just typing in, you know, whatever the different units, you know, like this is, you know, our 6 Pennsylvania Reserves. Going to Pennsylvania Historical Society, just typing in 6 Pennsylvania Reserves and hoping that somebody comes up, and then going through and checking their name against the list of casualties at Antietam in the cornfield, you know. And so it's a very detailed process, but it comes out so beautifully, I think, you know.
And then you have to work with the design department to sort of help realize that vision. How does that part of the process work?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. The designers are great, and we have a new designer. His name is Austin Stahl, and he has started working with us a couple months ago, and he's just been great so far. Brian Walker is the creative director at HistoryNet, so he had been working with us for a while as well. We did have, again, we had an art director who worked on our titles for quite a while. Her name was Jennifer Van, and she really tragically, honestly, and it was very difficult for us, was sick with cancer, and last year diagnosed with cancer, and she passed away in October. She was diagnosed in June and passed away in October. And it was very difficult because we had all worked with her for quite a while. So she kind of had a vision, and she knew this subject matter too. So she was also able to say, you know, if something was coming up and it just didn't look right, she would know, no, that doesn't look correct, or, you know, we could have a kind of a checks and balances. And so when we talked to so Brian kind of stepped in, and he worked on this article with us actually. And he just, you know, he just took it and ran with it. I thought he did a great job. And honestly, this is the final realization of it, but it goes through a couple of processes. So I do think at one point, some of these faces were a little bit bigger, and other parts there were that I think maybe a couple of groupings of some of them, and then we would read through it and Dana said, well, why don't we try to put these three together and then, you know, put these three over here. So there's a lot of little decisions that are made in the design process also. And even, you know, really it'll be something like, you know, do we put the call out here, you know, or do we put these guys on the bottom and the call out on top, you know? I will say that Brian Walker, who again is the creative art director, he is in charge of the whole art department as well at HistoryNet. He is just brilliant at that. And you could give him a layout and he'll say, I'm going to make a few tweaks, give it back to you. And you think, wow, this looks so much better. I'm not really sure what you did to it, but it looks way better. And he has a real command for understanding, you know, that maybe this background should be black and not white. It shouldn't be on a white background, you know, and just to bring that drama to it. And those are things I wouldn't even consider, you know, and as editors, the editors won't consider all those things either. And so it really is this partnership of creative people coming up with an idea and executing it in such a fun way. That's what I mean. It's really fun. It's a fun challenge, and it's so great to see it when it comes out and it's meaningful, you know. Actually, we took this article to the story itself is amazing. So we took this article to the cornfield, walked through the cornfield with the article, and kind of, you know, place by place, you know, you turned over here, and then this is what happens next. And it was really moving to be able to understand the fighting that well and have these pictures of people with us too that had been wounded there. So,
and you know, I really like that idea of putting human faces to these stories that we all tell, and we forget that often those are real people that we're talking about.
Yeah,
people just like you and me.
Right.
The decision to kind of humanize that's really pretty poignant, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was a really neat idea. Again, you could do so many things with this story, and to kind of focus it on that, it really changed it and made it I think it took it to another level, you know, and I think that's really neat. And I've got another example here too,
Yeah.
Of a way that we choose to illustrate something to make it, the presentation of it, completely different than what it could be. You know, there are so many different ways to present a story or an article idea. So this is actually a piece that came in about the Baltimore Riot in April of 1861. And we had the Michael Williams is the author, and he's actually a collector as well. So he had a couple of artifacts related to Baltimore in the Civil War, and particularly this incident in April when the troops are trying to come through and are attacked. You know, it's a border state, and it's really mostly Confederate sentiment at that point there. So when the federal troops who have to go through Baltimore to get to DC, they came through, they were attacked. And they were prepared to be attacked because there's actually this sort of, and the article kind of goes into this, in the travel at the time, you had to get off the train to get to the other train, you know, so you absolutely had to walk through Baltimore. So there was no avoiding it. And the story, of course, if you've studied the Civil War, and our audience has studied it incessantly, it's been told and people know the story. And what we had here were some new neat artifacts that people hadn't seen yet. And we wanted to make sure that the story was told in that way. Look at these artifacts that tell this story in a different fashion. It's not just about these troops, you know, so we turn it into sort of a portfolio of these rare artifacts. Wow. And so in the photo research department, and, you know, what I do then was go and look for more rare artifacts. You know, it's like, okay, now I have a mission, and I go, you know, find some new stuff. You know, we've got a couple things, let's find some more. So one of these artifacts here was a telegraph that this was the first telegraph, the last telegraph, I think, that goes out after the telegraph lines are cut. And, you know, says, we're fighting here, but don't be uneasy about the children are perfectly safe, you know, and that's like the last telegraph that gets sent before telegraph communication is cut off. And we have a couple of rare images, and then this drum from some of the troops that came through. This one we thought was just really neat. This was on the top of a flagpole of one of the flags that was carried by one of the civilians during that riot period. So this was just another, I think, cool example of how we've got 4.5 years of stories to work with, and a lot of these stories have been told already, but we have to find new ways to present them. And it's just such a fun challenge because the stories deserve to be told. You know, this is, you know, a young boy who was there. He was killed. He was like 17 years old. And it makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile to make sure that his story is still out there. So, so this is just another example of how, you know, we kind of, you can see how different this article is than the cornfield article. And, you know, there's just such a wide range of things you can do with text. You know, the text comes in and we have to find a way with art to present that story in a different way. So.
And, you know, the first image you showed there with the telegram, and it was filling up the whole page. And, you know, maybe a lot of our listeners and viewers today don't realize, like, that's a lot of real estate to give something in a magazine. So showing it off big like that is obviously an editorial choice where this is important, and we want to give this a lot of emphasis. And look at the detail you can see on that as a result. Yeah,
it's really neat. And it's just, that little thing tells you so much more. It tells you, it's not just, you know, cool to look at. It's, hey, this is how people communicated. They felt the need during this to get back in contact with people back home. You know, it gives you a sense of the urgency of what was happening at the time. And again, kind of puts a human twist on what was happening there.
Now, do you ever have to photograph any of these sorts of artifacts yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We get quite a few. Here, I'll stop sharing and try to find something. I think we just do. So we actually have a new department in the Civil War Times called Armament. And it kind of took the place of, once the coronavirus hit, we had a department called Explore, and that was sort of, you know, telling people to go, you know, to all these different places. And we have a similar one in America's Civil War, but it's very trail centric. So it's a partnership with Civil War Trails, and we decided we would keep that as a way to encourage people if they still wanted, to experience some of these places, that, to stay outside and do it, basically, it's still a worthwhile pursuit, and there are still these amazing places to see, but we didn't really feel safe telling people to go, to museums and stuff like that. So we were getting back into that a little bit now as the museums are opening up and stuff. And we try to work real closely with the Civil War Trails team and the places that we cover in America's Civil War to make sure that if we tell you to go there, it's open and stuff. So, and that they're following safe guidelines. But so anyways, this department, Armament, sort of took the spot of the Explorer. And it's now, it focuses on some piece of armament in a new way, shows you a different, why some specific weapon or artillery piece, or in this case, a bullet, is unique, important to the war. So this is actually, Dana actually writes this himself. And this is a example of, he's got a lot of artifacts of himself. He collects a lot of things. So he would, give these things to me, and then I'll bring them home. I have sort of a studio set up in the basement. And then I actually have a little light box in my office over here. And I'll shoot the photography for some of those. So, again, you can see, we'll shoot them in a bunch of different ways. And this is, again, is a really neat thing. Again, we wanted to make sure that people could see the seam on this. This bullet itself was a bullet that wasn't successful. It, the way it was made, it blew, it had called what is a blow through, it failed, and so it was just, we wanted to kind of show, that has a, if you've got your gun filled with these bullets, it has an effect on your that are, being employed. So, yes, there's a lot of times with that. And then actually, I'll show you the screen again, what I was talking about with the trailside department that we have. Let's see if I can get over here now. In America's Civil War, this is actually one that's coming out. This is one actually that I work pretty closely myself with the Civil War Trails team to put these trail sites out. And I will go out and photograph these sites. And actually, my background really is in writing as well. So I write these departments too. So, and again, kudos to Dana and Chris for just letting me run with stuff, because it's a really great place to work, because you could be pigeonholed into, no, you're a photo researcher and that's all you do. And they're not like that. It's, oh, you want to write some stuff too? Great, go for it. And I go,
I'm probably thinking, well, one less thing for me to have to write.
Maybe, but yeah, it could be, but it always turns out so fun. I love it. So, so they're really great about, letting us, move around and do stuff. And so, so this particular department, I'll do a lot of that too. And, so I will actually usually follow the whole route of whatever it is that we're trying to tell people, the places that we're telling people to go to for this trailside section in America's Civil War. And I'll take the photographs for most of them. Something like this one, the Ford's Theater, that is still closed because of coronavirus. And so, and which we say, in here, this place is still closed, and then I'll have to get stock photography to kind of fill it out. But for the most part, so like these museums, Surratt and Mudhouse, they're reopening in April. And actually really excited that we're doing this, because they're excited to be reopening, and it's kind of the anniversary of this one in general is Booth's getaway route. And, it's the anniversary of his escape route, and they're excited to be opening up again. So So that's always a lot of fun. I love getting out there and seeing some of these places too. So
The first time you and I met in person, and we had worked before on projects, virtually, but the first time we met in person, you were out in the field with Dana Show from the Peach Orchard at Gettysburg, and you've talked
yeah.
about Dana a couple times in our conversation. But what's it like to work with Dana?
I think it's great. I think, well, he'll be embarrassed, but because I always talk about how brilliant he is, but
I agree. I think he's just brilliant.
good. I'm glad. I think he has brilliant ideas. Like that cornfield story is it's a great idea. It's really, and it could be real easy to get complacent in a job and complacent with the content that you're presenting. And he's been immersed in the Civil War for decades, and he's never complacent with it. I mean, to him, it still is the story of these men who put their life on the line. And, so to me, it's fun. I think it's really fun. And I think the ideas that he comes up with are challenging and fun to execute. They really are. And I like to look at things in different ways like that. I don't, like to be complacent with a lot of things. I'm sort of a creative, passionate, adventurous type of person. I mean, I like photography and writing. I play guitar and write songs. Everything I do is sort of kind of creative, and it can be very easy in a job to get complacent with it and just sort of churn stuff out because you have to. And especially for us, we were actually furloughed for a little while during the for initial stages of the COVID outbreak, and our deadlines have become pretty fast and furious because we've made sure that we didn't miss any issues. Even though we were furloughed for a couple of months, we decided that we weren't going to miss any issues. I mean, some of our subscribers they collect these magazines, so we actually discussed it with the owners, that, hey, it's not just a magazine to some people. It's a institution and a collector's item. And so we haven't missed any issues, but in order to do that, we're going to spend the next year and a half making up months worth of lost work. So with a short staff, again, it is the publishing industry and they're not known for extra staffing.
And I think that ties back to what you said earlier about how, even though the magazine industry is always in transition these days, there's a component of Civil War readership, particularly, they like their hard copies. They like their
oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's a significant part of the Civil War culture.
Absolutely. I mean, we owe our jobs to them, really, because it is a pleasure to still work in print media. And that is a luxury that very few people in the publishing industry still enjoy. And a lot of times, even if they do work in print publication, print media, it's now the side job to the digital aspect of their job. And we are the opposite. And we are only that because of our subscribers, because our subscribers are very loyal and they like our content and they do want to hold this magazine. They want to look on the sides, on the spine, and see that they've got every single issue of it. We owe that to them. And again, I think part of that is it is working with people like Dana and Brian, the creative director, and people who are passionate about their jobs and want to do a good job and put out a good product. Our renewal rates are incredible. And in this industry, that's very difficult to achieve. And we enjoy a very good renewal rate. And our numbers actually before the coronavirus hit were actually going up again on the newsstands. And we were really you know, pretty enjoying a pretty good spike up. And of course, we're going to have to, you know, do it again. But we're fortunate to be back as fast as we were. And again, we owe that to the subscribers. We really do. We owe it to the subscribers and everybody who goes out and purchases a print copy of this magazine, because our digital sales are, you know, our digital ad sales and stuff, they are not the bread and butter that, you know, keep us employed. It is the print publication. And again, I'm grateful for that, because I think that's the fun part of it. You know, digital communications are fun too. And we of course have to have a digital presence, but we have a lot of fun with the print publication too.
What's it like working with Chris on America's Civil War, and how is the work on that magazine different than with Civil War Times?
Oh, Chris is great too. He's very, he's really detail oriented too, which is great. And he is a great editor. You know, he turns copy around in a way that you can't really envision when you're looking at it. And he has this way of turning it into a new idea and a new story that's really neat. So, and he's also very generous, you know, oh, that's a good idea, go for it. You know, he's great as well. He's really fun. And he has a journalism background. So he's really a wordsmith, you know, and so I like that a lot too. He's my background particularly is in art and journalism. So we have a lot of banter about words, and we could have a conversation about the Oxford comma till you're blue in the face. Let's talk about the Oxford comma, but we think it's fun. And so he's great to work with too. And he has some neat ideas. And again, we call him Eagle Eye because he catches everything. Yeah, like he's real good at catching stuff. So, and that's what I mean. The people that work at this company, they care about their, you know, putting out a good product. And that's what makes it so much great to work here. I mean, if you're a person that is also, you know, cares about your product, cares about telling the story and telling it right and in a new way, you just can't beat it. You really cannot. I mean, the people here really, really care about. It's not a place where somebody comes to work and checks out at 5 o'clock and, you know, is done. You know, we'll be talking and we'll talk sometimes. And if I've got a question, I'll call somebody at 7 o'clock at night. And, you know, we love our jobs. We like to do what we're doing and we have fun with it. So.
Just before we signed on, we talked about sketchy internet, and apparently I had a glitch with mine, and I've lost my background. I think this
yes, I noticed that it had changed. But
we were just seeing the back of my house for the first time ever, I think, perhaps. One of the things I think is cool about your background, I'm used to seeing shelves of books behind people, and you've got this wall of wonderful photographs that then you have positioned your camera so it's at a tangent cutting across rather than sort of flat behind you. I can tell you're a designer. What a wonderful background that is, though.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was actually, it's kind of a funny story because they're all photographs that I took. And I mean, a lot of them are little black and whites and stuff. A lot of them are my children, but they're all little artsy photographs of places that we've been or, you know, things that I've seen. And I am, this is a little more personal than probably you care, but I am a twin. So I never had my own room when I was growing up. And then I had an apartment for a little while, but not a very long time. I've always shared my room space with somebody, and I got married pretty young. So, you know, even, you know, then it's like, okay, so I've always shared my room space. And we actually had a pretty small place when we had our kids first. We had a townhouse, and my office space was a desk that sat in the middle of the living room, you know. I would write with, you know, kids hanging on me and stuff. And so my husband and I bought this house in 2015, I think. We upgraded our house space, and I think he said, we walked through and it was like, well, this, I was like, well, could that be my office? I'm like, can I have that room for my office? And he was like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm like, oh my gosh. So this is like my first room ever in my life. So I immediately went to work on, like the rest of the house, I'm like, I don't care what it looks like, but the office, so I immediately was like, I'm putting all these pictures on the wall and started designing it. So I appreciate that you took the time to notice it. So.
I share this space with my wife, but she's actually exiled my whole library into an apartment above the garage. So I have a separate workspace for that stuff. But
yeah.
It sounds like I want to go back to something you talked about a little earlier with your background in journalism, which of course is my background. It sounds like we both kind of came to the Civil War in similar ways, where you were an expert in writing and photography, and then through that became an expert in Civil War stuff. As opposed to being the Civil War historian first who happened to learn photography. And I'm the same way. Like as a writer, I just happened to then start writing about the Civil War and became an expert that way. So tell me a little bit, like what's it been like to teach yourself to be an expert on the Civil War through your expertise in photography?
Well, it's been fun, I think. Again, I think that's fun. I love learning new stuff. So when I was a kid, actually, I really was interested in Abraham Lincoln. So, but when you grow up and stuff, it wasn't anything that I stayed with. I, kind of, and I do think this is kind of a thing about being a female. When I was in elementary school, I didn't think there was a future for me in studying history, or that wasn't anything that honestly I ever even considered. And it really, even writing didn't come to me until later. And the only reason I even thought about writing was because my uncle was a copywriter for an ad agency. And I thought, oh, that sounds fun. You can get paid to write, So I always kind of wanted to do something with writing, and I was really into art. And then in high school, well, in 6th grade, I went to camp for photography, and it was the first time I learned how to develop photographs in a dark room. And my mother actually did go to school for photography or for art. She got an art degree when I was in high school. So she was actually, she spent a lot of her time raising kids too, and then kind of went back. And so she always had a darkroom in the basement, and well, for the last few years of my high school career. So I was the school photographer. And I loved that darkroom more than she ever used it. But and actually, I still have all of her equipment down in my basement. But so that was kind of how I got into that. And again, kind of lost interest in some of the other stuff. I was always really interested in politics and stuff. And when I was writing, I'll never forget when I finally started writing professionally, working as an intern at the weekly newspaper. And the guy told me to go write this story, and it was an okay story. But then the next story I had to write was about this book that was coming out about the electric company in town. I lived in Milwaukee at the time. I'm from Wisconsin, so I've got to put that in there.
You're not wearing a cheese head. I would not have done.
I have one up there if you want to see it, but so yeah, I remember he told me, he assigned me to go write this story about this book that was coming out commemorating the electric company in town. And it wasn't about the book, it wasn't about the history of it, it was about this fight between the funding of it. And I remember thinking, boy, is that boring, like, I don't want to write about that, and kind of having this realization that being a writer meant I was going to have to write about a lot of stuff I just didn't care about, and I spent a long time doing that. I mean, when the kids were little, I took whatever job I could get. And I think we were talking a little bit before, I took whatever job I could get that gave me time to be at home and raise them, you know. And so I worked for a company, and, you know, I loved the people I worked with, but it was the Japan Digest, and it was mostly about the automotive industry. And I'm not a car person. So, and after that, I started writing about healthcare, which I did find interesting. I really, you know, I do think I'm a curious person. So when I start learning about something, I kind of become a little obsessive about it and learn a lot about it. So I do remember, I've always really though liked, you know, history and the historic, you know, my husband likes history, and, you know, I've always really been interested in history. And a lot of the stuff I wrote in college was World War II research that I did, actually based on some family members and stuff like that too. So, you know, when the job came up for this, I remember looking at the ad and saying, wait, photos, research, writing, and history, and why can't I get this job? And, you know, I was so thrilled, you know, to get it. And so when I started learning about it, it was just natural to just be like a sponge, you know, and soak it up. I think when you look at how they teach, maybe not now, my kids learn a lot more history stories. When I was in school, we learned geography and dates, and I'm not good at that. I'm not. I am a creative person, but I like history, and I always say I'm a concept person, and I like the concepts. So, you know, I'll remember stories about things because of how crazy they were, or the, you know, the emotional aspect of it, and the human factor, or, you know, this guy, you know, his son went off to war, but the name will escape me. So it's the concepts that I remember. And once I started learning all this stuff, you know, with history really is stories. It's stories. And they don't teach that stuff in school. They don't. I just was saying that to my daughter the other day. She was asking about what honors classes she should take. And again, as a woman, a female, you know, I do think there's a thing of like, she said, well, what should I take? And I said, well, you love stories, and, you know, why don't you take history? And, oh, you're just saying that because you like history. And I said, no, you love stories. And she's like, well, not history. And I'm like, history is stories. It's stories. And once you start delving into those, they're amazing. You can't stop. You can't stop looking at those faces. And so I didn't find it hard. And actually, again, Dana knows so much about the Civil War, and he's so good at telling stories and engaging you in it as well. So I do think, I do actually credit Dana and Chris with helping me, you know, really embrace sort of a confidence in learning it. Not once did I ever mess up a unit or call a division, a regiment or something and feel ashamed of it, you know, because when I was first learning this stuff.
Because we all have to first learn it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And they're very, oh, no problem, you know, people just, you know, people learn it. You'll figure it out. Go look it up, you know. And I'm like, oh, okay, I will, you know. It's so, and it, once you get down a rabbit hole, it's fun. That's actually how we kind of started Hump Day History, you know, is one of our features on Facebook. And we just were kind of looking for something to put up there on a regular basis. And I would be doing this, you know, so Dana was like, let's come up with this idea, you know, that we'll do weekly, you know, thing. And that is where all those Hump Day History stories come from, is I'm doing research for a photo, or I'm out on a battlefield, or, you know, we're reading something somewhere else, and it's a little snippet story that you hear and you think, oh my God, that's so cool. People need to know that. But is it going to be a 3,000 word feature? No, it's not. But it's so cool. You got to know this, you know? So.
those nuggets. It's for me, that was the huge epiphany because I had the same experience, going through school. History was names, dates, places, kind of
Yeah.
and then realizing that this is really just a great, fascinating story. It's like, oh, and that really opened it up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Melissa, before we run out of time, let me just ask one quick question to wrap up. If you had advice to give to a young woman who is thinking about getting into the history field, Civil War history in particular, what advice might you offer? And I'm putting you on the spot, I realize.
No, that's okay. I would absolutely say, first of all, go for it, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think there is a, yeah, I mean, this would be a larger answer, but I think in some ways females are conditioned by society not to ask questions or to be ashamed that they have to ask a question or, and I would say, walk up to people and ask questions. People they will embrace your knowledge. And if they don't, that's them, not you, And I think that's probably the biggest factor that women in any sort of field that really is still male dominated. I mean, it is still male dominated. There are plenty of times where I'm on a Zoom and I'm the only female. And I think I'm lucky that, again, Dana, Chris, Brian, those guys, I'm just a person, and they just treat me like a person with a brain, and creative ideas. And I don't ever feel like I'm the only female on a Zoom. But I think when you're young and you're starting out, it's easy to see yourself as the only female in a class or the only female in a Zoom or the only female pursuing military tactics when the rest of them are men. I do remember being in like philosophy classes and stuff, and I'd be the only female in that class. And I'm like, why aren't there any other females here? And so I would say, part of it is just confidence, like just, you might be the only one or something, and also stick with the women too. There are a lot of females that have already trudged the road, people like Megan Kate Nelson, or Caroline Janney, they are brilliant and they are smart. And I've definitely noticed on social media presence and stuff, they'll answer questions too. Susanna Euro, ask her a question, she'll answer it, and they'll give you advice too as to how to go forward. And, and they've already done it, so it can be done. So.
Great. That's great advice. In fact, good advice for all of my students, particularly, just go ask questions. Great.
Yeah.
So, we're going to have to do this again. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great.
We've got a ton more stuff that we could talk about. So let's
absolutely
call your people, and we'll do this again. So,
all right, sounds good. Absolutely.
Winn, the director of photography for HistoryNet, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.